Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, it's the House of Lords again. I mentioned on air last night the government were facing defeat, and they indeed lost 3 votes in the House of Lords last night. This on the EU withdrawal bill. This something that's already gone through the House of Commons. And crucially, the one amendment, the one vote that's been sent back to the House of Commons is one that says that Parliament could send ministers back to the negotiating table if MPs voted down Theresa May's Brexit deal. So basically, any Brexiteer MP or peer, when it comes to it later on this year or very early next, when that crucial vote comes, if this was to stand, all they would have to do is vote down the deal, knowing that Brexit on the 29th of March next year simply couldn't happen. So this is a wrecking amendment. In fact, the House of Lords are working to try and stop Brexit from taking place. And just listen to some of them. I mean, Viscount Hailsham telling us in democracies, both Parliament and the electorate have the right to change their mind. This is about the future of our country. It must be determined by Parliament, not by ministers. This the same Viscount Hailsham, now talking about sovereignty, who spent his entire career trying to transfer national sovereignty to sovereignty at a European level. The very same people who never wanted us to have a referendum in the first place are those now trying to reverse the result and indeed to force us to vote again. I thought the best quote on all of this came from the former Tory leader, Lord Howard of Limp, who said that the House of Lords, the unelected chamber, is defying not only the will of the people, by which he means the referendum vote, but also the will of the elected chamber of Parliament. Now look, back in 1911, there was a huge parliamentary row. It went on for months. It finished up with the Parliament Act being put into place. And what it meant was that ultimately, whilst the House of Lords can delay, stop, make the Commons think again, and it can do it, it can send it back 3 times, ultimately, the elected government of the day can, in the final analysis, overrule the House of Lords. And we've been working with that effectively since 1911. There's also been a convention that's been in place for decades that the House of Lords would not stand against policies that have been set out in the manifesto of the elected government. It's known as the Salisbury Convention. But I could see where this was going a few months ago when we had Peter Hain, Lord Hain as he now is, on one of our Sunday morning shows. And I said, but surely, Lord Hain, you wouldn't go against the Salisbury Convention. Ah, Nigel, he said, but this Conservative government don't have an absolute majority. And that was his excuse for doing it. Well, I would say this to Lord Hain and to all of you in the House of Lords, both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party were elected into this Parliament. Indeed, 85% of voters at the last general election voted for parties saying in their manifestos we would leave both the single market and the customs union. And frankly, what you are doing as a chamber is completely beyond the pale, though not surprising, given its makeup. Blair abolished the old hereditary peers, many of whom had sat there for centuries, if they ever turned up, and you could see those wonderful pictures of them all fast asleep after lunch or whatever it may be. And Blair got rid of them, telling us he would create an upper chamber suitable for modern Britain. And what he did was he appointed 357 people to the House of Lords. If that wasn't bad enough, David Cameron added to that already bloated chamber. Cameron actually appointed more peers for each year in power than any other Prime Minister. Another 242 went in under David Cameron. What we have now is a House of Commons absolutely full of a London-dominated career political class. Many of them former civil servants, many of them former MPs, some of them former European commissioners. We even find the Lib Dems have 100 life peers sitting for them in the House of Lords, whereas parties like UKIP, which did, after all, in the 2014 European elections, win a national election, something that had not been done by any party since 1906 that wasn't Labour or Tory, and UKIP were never appointed with a single one. So you've got a group of peers from New Labour and Cameroon Conservatives, who frankly are indistinguishable from each other on most issues from the day, now, of course, totally unaccountable because they've effectively got these jobs for life. They are not only hopelessly out of touch with this country, but they are willfully trying to bring the government and the Brexit process down. And I think, frankly, enough is enough. And I've got a suggestion here. I think what Theresa May ought to do is to say, you have stepped way beyond your constitutional remit. You are going against the stated view of people in this country, not just in a referendum, but clearly by how they voted in a general election. And unless you start to act as a constructive revising chamber, by all means make one or two suggestions about how we might do this better. But unless you start to behave in a constructive manner, then I will push forward legislation to have a referendum on the abolition of your lordship's house. Now, that may seem to some of you to be a very Trumpian tactic, because that's exactly what he'd do, but frankly, I think unless she does this, they're going to give her hell all the way through this process. So tell me, am I right? Should she threaten them with a referendum on their abolition? If you think, no, Nigel, you're wrong, the House of Lords are acting in our best interests. Viscount Hailsham, who I mentioned earlier, he, of course, who claimed the money, for public money, for cleaning out the moat of his country house. You know, maybe you think these people are defending our interests, and if you do, you call me and tell me that I've got this absolutely wrong. Call 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think, yep, give them a taste of their own medicine. And you can do that and let me know that by texting to 84850. Or maybe you think I'm just off my rocker even suggesting this. Maybe you think no one cares about the House of Lords. Well, historically, people generally haven't. I think today, actually, they do. Let me know your opinion. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch us on Facebook, and you can comment there too. Let's go to Martin in New Cross. Good evening, Martin. I'm really angry about the way the Lords are behaving, Martin. How do you feel?
Evening, Nigel. I'm in complete agreement. I have long felt that the House of Lords should be abolished, but I also think your idea is a very good one, because it would be the biggest defeat in a referendum result ever, because you would see the country, 80%, 90% vote to get rid of the House of Lords.
Well, do you know, Martin, I floated this idea on this show 2.5, 3 months ago, when I said, yes, I do support a second referendum. I supported on whether we abolish the House of Lords. But it now strikes me, Martin, that Theresa May can quite legitimately say this to them, and I think she should.
I do as well, but it would never happen, because as we know, Theresa May loves the establishment. I mean, she's very much part of it. But when you look at the makeup of the House of Lords, some of the people that are in there, I mean, goodness me, you've got people like Lord Heseltine still clinging around like a bad smell. If you look at the Labour Party,
you're speaking, Martin, about a former. You're speaking about a former Deputy Prime Minister of this country. Don't you think he deserves more respect?
No, not really.
No, nor do I. Anyway, go on. Martin,
some of the things you said about Brexiteers, I don't think so.
The place is full of party apparatchiks, most of their names you've never even heard of in your life.
Oh, I know.
And many, of course, are there simply because they were party donors. You might be old enough to remember, Martin, the Cash for Honour scandal that happened in the latter years of Blair's time. The place is not fit for purpose, is my view. It's your view, too. Theresa May needs to pack the Lords with Brexiteers to get the government's Brexit legislation through, says Anne in Lancashire. Now, Anne, I'd thought of this. One idea would be that she says, right, we're going to create 500 Brexit peers, and they will go in, take ermine, swear their oath, but on their honour, they will resign their seats in the House of Lords once Brexit has passed. The difficulty, Anne, with that, and I thought that was a great idea a few months ago when it was put to me, the difficulty is the Lords themselves can slow up the process of new peers being admitted. So I'm afraid that plan isn't foolproof. Let's ask Sandra, a first-time caller from Bedford. Sandra, what's motivated you to pick up the phone for the first time?
Yeah, hello, Nigel. First time I've called you, actually.
I know. I'm very pleased to hear from you. So, do you feel strongly about this?
I do feel strongly. You won't like what I'm going to say, though, because I don't trust that Theresa May would probably love what you suggest. And she would, I really do. I don't better the devil you know, because what would replace the House of Lords?
Oh, well, Sandra, I mean, personally, I think that, I mean, for me, Sandra, the biggest priority in electoral reform in this country was to change the method by which we elect MPs, to change the constituencies, and to perhaps have multi-member constituencies. I thought changing the House of Commons was the biggest priority, and we just let the Lords be, and sort it out at a later date. But frankly, the way they're behaving over Brexit says to me that, frankly, I think they're signing their own death warrant, Sandra, and I personally think that an elected Senate is the only way to go.
Who would decide on that elected Senate?
We put it to a referendum, obviously, and there are lots of different... I mean, my idea is that you elect people to the House of Lords for one 15-year term. That's all they can serve. You do it across the country, you do it on some form of proportionality, and then when it comes to needing experts, to come in, the committees can co-opt whoever they want onto those committees. Now, the one argument against it, Sandra, is that if you do have an elected second chamber, it will be more powerful and it will use that power, and it could then make it genuinely more difficult for government to get legislation through, and that has always been the argument against it. But frankly, I think what we've got is a disgrace. A place packed full of Blair and Cameron's mates, the political elite. They really have no connection with the ordinary folk of this country at all.
Well, yeah, I'd agree with you there, but I think, to be honest with you, I think when it comes to Brexit, I really think that perhaps you won't like this, but I think we're making a mistake now. I don't trust any of them. I do actually. I voted leave, but I think it's a mistake now. I think we should stay because the alternative really concerns me.
What is the alternative that concerns you, Sandra?
But I think our government are out of control. They don't know where they're going. I don't trust a word they say. And I actually think on this occasion, when it comes to Brexit, I think perhaps the Lords also feel the way I do. It's really complex.
Well, the Lords are all Remainers, Sandra. It is the most Remain assembly probably in the world.
That's what I know. It's really hard, but I actually think on this occasion they are probably right.
But they have a convention not to go against the elected government of the day, and both the major parties were elected, Sandra, less than a year ago, saying we should leave the single market and the customs union, and the Lords are trying to overturn that.
But it was so close. The referendum, the result was so close.
It was the biggest exercise in democracy in the history of this country, and that's all you can say. And actually, Sandra, now, what do the opinion polls say? 68 to 70% of people say, whatever our view was then, can we please just get on with it?
Yeah, but who are we? Where are our business deals? Where are our future business deals? Who do they lie with?
Well, Sandra, that's a separate debate. All I will say to that is 85% of the world economy is outside the Eurozone. Europe is a relatively small part now of the overall globe. Sandra, we'll come back to it. Ring me back when we're debating Brexit itself. Well, the Daily Mail were very unimpressed indeed by the antics of the House of Lords last night. Their big front page, House of Unelected Wreckers, and pictures of various peers, including Viscount Hailsham, he of cleaning out the moat at public expense fame. And Chuka Umunna has responded to this with a big chain email saying the Daily Mail say they support Brexit because they want to protect the sovereignty of Parliament. Now they're attacking the Lords for doing just that. Chuka, I know you keep trying this one on us. It's the sovereignty of the people that matters, not the sovereignty of Parliament. The people put people in Parliament. They lend them their authority for 4 or 5 years, and at each election, the people take it back again. Let's go to Jeremy, a first-time caller from Bushy. Good evening, Jeremy.
Hi, Nigel. The issue with the House of Lords, which you seem to be missing, because I will support the House of Lords, is that the House of Lords are speaking for the 48% of British voters who have gone completely unheard since you've got the results.
Unheard? You dominate the headlines every single day, Jeremy. You've got your big business battalions, the BBC.
Nigel, you're on all night, okay? I don't have much time, okay?
You've got plenty of time, Jeremy.
No, I haven't. I've got to get somewhere, okay?
Oh, right, I can't help that.
The bottom line is this, okay? So 17 million people voted out. 15 million people voted in. Mm-hmm. They've shown no respect They've shown nothing, okay? Characters like you bulldozer the way through. The House of Lords is simply acting as a gatekeeper to protect the interests of the 48% of British voters who've been forgotten and are not respected by everybody else. I'm afraid we're not all Thames Estuary man. We don't have immigration at the forefront.
Oh, Jeremy, are these ghastly working class types? Is that what you mean?
Now, I'm a working class person.
Oh, really? Thames Estuary, what, people with horrible accents, that sort of thing, yeah?
Or if you come from Salford, or if you come from the northeast of England, where they just by the skin of their teeth kept their jobs there. So the reality is, and by the way, this is the other thing. Tell me how wonderful it is here in Britain. Where are the great results that are going on? Why is Jaguar Land Rover having problems? Why are shops closing on our high street? Why is business actually not that great?
Jeremy, I think shops will... In fact, we heard today, in fact, that another bank is closing another 170 branches. They are separate issues. They are part of a big structural change that's going on. But Jeremy, here's the key point. Here's the key point, Jeremy. What is the House of Lords for? It's a revising chamber. It's a check and balance on government legislation. Yes, understood fully. But, Jeremy, the argument I'm making is that for decades we've had a convention that says the House of Lords does not outright oppose government legislation if it was part of a government's manifesto. And the point I'm making is the House of Lords are overstepping the mark by doing this.
And the point I am making is that they are protecting the interests of something like 15 million voters in this country who said, we don't agree with it. Okay, that's all they're simply doing. That's my thinking behind it, and a little bit of common sense and putting the brakes on so people can think. And by the way, one of your previous callers said, let's bring on a referendum. It'll be a 90% win. It won't be a 90% win because the 48% of people who said, I don't want to vote myself out of Europe, will say, actually, no, let's keep the House of Lords.
Yeah, let's keep that. I tell you what, Jeremy, you're way wide of the mark with that, in my opinion. This place, this House of Lords, stuffed with Blair's mates and Cameron's mates, it is, this amazing retirement home for the political class without any accountability. It's past its, regardless of this vote last night, it's past its sell-by date.
The only thing they should have done, you mentioned Cameron, which I will agree with you on. Cameron got it wrong. It should have been a clear 60-40 majority on that vote. That's what it should have been. It should have 60-40, and then we wouldn't have been in this pickle that we're in today.
I know. Jeremy, all we want to do is govern. All we want to do is be a sovereign people that govern our own country, Jeremy. What on earth is wrong with that?
It should be 60-40.
Should it? Well, keep us trapped in forever. In fact, what we could do is make Mr. Juncker king, actually. Get rid of the royal family.
It's not a matter that we'll be in forever. 60-40 is the way you get a fair, clear majority on any vote, not 52-48. I'm sorry, that was too close to call.
Well, I tell you what, it was a miracle result.
With respect, you're making an industry out of it.
It was a miracle result. It was a miracle result. Given we had the whole world against us, the fact we got 52% was a miracle. Jeremy, you think the House of Lords are protecting the interests of the 48%? I respect that opinion, but it's not what the House of Lords is for, and that is the point I'm making. Jeremy, thank you for calling. There are loads of people speaking up for the so-called 48%. Fact is, though, there are fewer than 48% now by quite some margin. Mervyn from Belper, and I had to actually Google Belper in the break to find out what it is. A delightful place in Derbyshire. I might come and see you one day, Mervyn. He says, and I rather reflect this too, he says, I've always believed that a second house is necessary to keep a check on the lawmakers. But after this fiasco, I would vote to abolish the House of Lords. Mervyn, so would I, but I do still think a second chamber does make sense. Abolish the House of Lords. They're a complete waste of taxpayers' money and totally unrepresentative of modern democracy. Martin is a first-time caller from Glasgow. Good evening, Martin.
Yeah, hello. Good evening, Nigel. How MD can come on this phone and defend a lot of middle-class, well-paid, pompous, pious idiots who are telling us about Brexit and trying to stop it, beggars belief. The quicker we get rid of this lot of trash, the better.
Trash. It's a very strong word. But Martin, we've got some of the great and the good in there. Apparently some of the finest minds in the country.
Well, I doubt that very much. They're self-serving idiots, just like the EU. And it's about time the Brexiteers stood up against this, because I'll tell you one thing, if it was the other way, namely the Remainers, and especially the left of the Remainers, they'd be out demonstrating right now And I'm sick to death, day in, day out, hearing this utter garbage through the media, anti-Brexit, that's all I hear. And it's time people just stood up and did something about it.
Yeah, this is where Martin, the last caller, was way wide of the mark. As if no one's speaking up for the Remain argument. We hear it constantly, don't we?
Well, we hear it constantly, and it's quite obvious that's not the case, because any time I listen to the news, it's always some negativity.
Yep.
And let's face it, we've got a Remainer Prime Minister whose heart's not in it, like most of our cabinet. I think it's a disgrace, and I think it's time something was done about this, because I'm sick to death hearing about this.
Yeah. Martin, do you think my idea of Theresa May saying to the House of Lords, you have overstepped the mark, start playing the game constitutionally the way it should be played, or we're going to have a referendum on your abolition? Would that be a good idea?
Nigel, that would be a fantastic idea, but let's put it this way. You and I know she's not going to do that. She's going to bend backwards for them. She's going to submit, as she's done to a lot of the EU things. And it's idealistic to think that could happen, although it's wonderful if it did. But let's face it, it ain't going to happen with her.
Martin, I fear you're probably right. But they are forcing her into a very difficult situation. I mean, even today, David Davis had to appear before a House of Lords Brexit committee. It's as if the unelected are now in control of the elected bit.
What I don't understand is how people can come on here and don't realise that these people in that House of Lords, as you correctly say, is made up of the friends of Blair
and Cameron. Yeah.
I mean, for goodness sake, how biased can you get?
It's a farce, Martin. It's a farce. Total farce.
Nigel.
Great call. Your first-time caller. Do call me again. Thank you very much indeed. Deb says on Facebook, you need experts for scrutiny. But that doesn't need to be and shouldn't be politically orientated. Paid experts could do the same job with no political power at all. Deb, the idea of a revising chamber, and one of the arguments for the House of Lords with its eclectic mix is that it was full of experts. Now it's full of politicians and civil servants. There are fewer people in there with real experience of the world than there been. I would have thought probably at any point in its time. Even the hereditary peers at least gave it representation from around the UK. Now it's a huge London metropolitan bias. It isn't working. Well, Liam Fox has been busy today, and he's been trying to allay concerns about a reduction in food standards after Brexit if we were to go into a free trade deal with the United States of America. He said it's scaremongering to say that Britain would be forced to accept sales of food including chlorinated chicken or modified wheat. He told Sky News there are no preconditions about any potential agreement with the USA. Whether we go for a full free trade agreement or whether we look at something new and innovative, we will have to see. And it's interesting, from the Remain perspective, free trade with Europe is fantastic, but free trade with the rest of the world, highly questionable, which I do find odd. On the American theme, Jacob Rees-Mogg has written a piece in the Times today, President Trump will be our greatest ally after Brexit. And it's a piece basically saying we should roll out the red carpet, we should treat him with respect, they are our greatest ally, and in terms of security, in terms of economics and trade and everything else, this, in the long term, is the most important relationship in the world to us, and Trump is a pro-British president. Can't think who's ever said that before. Interesting, isn't it? Jacob, great stuff. I thought for a long time, it felt in this country like I was the only person prepared to stand up and say anything good about Trump. But I do think people are beginning to come round. Back to the House of Lords. Back to my idea. I think Theresa May should say to the Lords, obey your constitutional responsibilities. Stop trying to scupper the Brexit process the way that you are, or I'm going to push forward legislation to have a referendum on your abolition. Gosh, I'd enjoy that referendum. That would be fun. What does Virginia, a first-time caller from Manchester, think of it all? Good evening, Virginia.
Good evening, Nigel.
Well, thanks for calling. How do you feel on this?
As far as I'm concerned, first of all, the Lord's vote presents a real conundrum for the Remainers, because according to them, all of us Brexiteers are old, aren't we? How are they going to spin this one?
Well, yes, the average age of the House of Lords is quite old. You're true. That's absolutely right.
How are they going to get around that one? And as far as I'm concerned, the Lords should just be a checking chamber. They are there just to say, this legislation has gone through the House of Parliament. by people elected by the electorate, and we are going to check that it is within the law, it is within...
Have you got me on speakerphone there, Virginia?
I haven't, no, Nigel.
Just sounds a little bit muffled, but okay. So the House of so we've had a referendum, we've had a general election. The House of Commons have voted on this stuff, and they should not be rejecting it in this way.
No, they're purely a checking chamber. They are there to make sure, just to review it, to ensure that it is within the law, that, you know, they're not taking any particular liberties. But at this point in time, we've been given a referendum, and that is the be-all and end-all. We won.
Yep.
You know, by 0.1% or 2% or 10%, whatever, we won.
Are you confident, Virginia, despite all the shenanigans going on now, are you confident that we are going to leave the Union on March 29th next year?
No.
You're not? You're worried?
No, absolutely not. I'm absolutely really worried. I'm a politics graduate, and in 1997, this isn't a big thing, but in 1997, I wrote my dissertation on why we should leave the EU.
Did you really? Wow.
And that was, yes, I did. And that was 20-odd years ago. And my conclusion was that we were never going to get a referendum because we were so far along the route, as opposed to 1975, that we knew where it was going. You know, pure federalism, and they were never going to let us vote on that.
Right. So you were basically thrilled that we had this referendum.
Beyond belief. I think I was the only person in the whole of my constituency who actually had posters in their window for vote leave.
Very good. Virginia, great call. I hope you're wrong. I really do. Thank you for calling. Jean thinks that Virginia is wrong. Jean says on Facebook, the Brexit process has begun. Article 50 was triggered. The UK cannot go back on that. Well, morally, it can't go back on it, Jean. And Jean, I have to say, I still think, despite all of this, I still think we are going to leave on the 29th of March next year. All I can say is if we don't, be prepared for a political backlash in this country, the likes of which you've never seen before in your lives. That I'm confident, I'm certain of it actually. On Twitter, I get, every time the House of Lords does something that a political clique doesn't like, there are calls to abolish it, says Philip. Philip, I've been criticising it now for a very long time. I just think frankly, it's verging on political corruption, the way the whole thing has now been set up, with over 500 of Cameron and Blair's mates sitting in there. The thing is a farce. Definitely not. An unelected chamber of mainly bright and experienced high achievers is absolutely necessary at an advisory level. I get that on Twitter. If they were bright, experienced high achievers, I might think differently. A lot of them are party political apparatchiks, many of whom achieved very little in politics at all, but found themselves, because they're party loyalists, in the House of Lords. Honestly, you know, the argument that was there before was the eclectic mix of people meant there were experts from all walks of life in there. That is still true to a certain extent, but far less so than it was before, because of the consequences of the sheer numbers that Blair and Cameron have put in there. Jonathan is another first-time caller from Dunstable. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Nigel. Unlike Jeremy, I'm also very busy. I'm at work, but I have the time to talk to you, which is why I phoned in the radio.
Yeah. That was very odd, wasn't it?
Arrogant, but of him.
I tell you, Jonathan, just quickly, what was arrogant? He talked about Thames estuary types.
Well, you know, as a working-class boy, which I really am, I'm in public practice. I run a firm of chartered certified accountants. I'm going to say no more than that. And I'm working late tonight, as I often have to. I'm a firm Brexiteer, but I think that the House of Lords needs to be kept. My concerns with the House of Lords is not that it's got political people in there, because, to my mind, one of the important checks and balances of the House of Lords is they review the progress of legislation. And I think that's one of the cases where having a parliamentary experience, which most of them have, is so incredibly important. I think they're more relevant than, say, the bishops that get into the House of Lords. What I'm concerned about is often the way in which successful businessmen, and yes, they do a lot for the country, and yes, they employ a lot of people, but nevertheless, this is all done for their own best interest, are rewarded with a lordship. That sort of kind of concerns me most. I mean, I voted Brexit, I was pro-Brexit, I even had a leave the EU poster in the front of my practice, so that's how political I am. But I do think that the House of Lords has its value. I think what needs to be done here, and what I think a good leader or a strong leader would do, is basically make a statement. What has been done at the moment is absolutely unacceptable abuse of temporary power, which is all it is. It's a temporary power. And there are so many people, regardless of their political alliances within a party, that have this strong interest, because of their own sponsors, I believe, to stay within the EU. And I think this is the real crux of it. This is an abuse of temporary power to drag out the process.
Jonathan, I am all in favour of a revising chamber, all right? All in favour of it. All in favour of people looking at legislation, saying, have you really thought about that? All in favour of having the best experts they can find from anywhere in the world on each of these subjects. I'm all in favour of all of that. But, you know, there comes a point, since the 1911 Parliament Act, there has been a different relationship, has there not, between the Commons and the Lords? And the Salisbury Convention, which has been there for goodness knows how long, for decades, says you do not go against the manifesto pledges of the elected government of the day. And I believe, Jonathan, that is what the House of Lords have done here.
I agree. I agree with you totally. I would actually question the point about the specialisation that anyone needs in the House of Lords, because by default, if you look at the House of Commons, when we had the banking crisis, the amount of people that were asked off the cuff, what's the size of our national debt? And some of them had no idea.
Oh, no idea.
Concept, because, of course, that's not their skill set. They're from all different walks of life. But I think the real issue
Jonathan,
is we know the political position.
But Jonathan, the problem is that actually, when you say the House of Commons is full of people from different political walks of life, it's not. Increasingly, so many people go from university into a research office and into Parliament.
So I meant political walks of life. So, for example, you have people in the Labour Party that then become Labour Lords. That's what I was referring to.
Okay,
I agree
sorry.
that they're not a lot of little... There are very few Dennis Skinner types get into the House of Lords. Let's put it like that. And I would agree with you on that point.
No, absolutely. So, Jonathan, I say that Mrs May should say to them, you've overstepped the mark, and you and I both agree that's what she should say, is my proposal of threatening them with a referendum on their abolition, do you think I'm over the top with that?
I think that it would be counterproductive, because I think it would just take more time, and it would to take away from the Brexit argument. I think what she should do is give an interview on a couple of chat shows and say what has happened has been disgraceful. This is a shame on the House of Lords, and this is what they've done, and they've ignored the electorate. Because I, Mrs May, didn't want to leave Europe. We all know that. I've always said that. I still feel a bit upset about it. But there was a sizable, over 1 million people voted one way more than the other way. And if we ignore a referendum, do we start ignoring elections if we don't like the result?
And that's the problem, isn't it? Then the whole thing breaks down. Jonathan, great call. Thank you very much. Enjoy working late with LBC there on in the background. And you obviously couldn't resist the temptation to pick up the call. I get a very sarcastic tweet here. Oh, yeah, what a great idea. Let's do all this populist tripe all over again. No solution. Let's just rant about what we don't like with no alternatives. Sophia, I've made it clear. I believe there should be an elected Senate. I think it's the only thing that works and is fit for a 21st century post-Brexit Britain. The House of Lords is there to be a revising chamber to look at and amend legislation, but not to counter the elected government of the day's manifesto promises. And yet, over Brexit, that's exactly what the House of Lords are doing. We have an intensely political House of Lords. They're mostly a bunch of ex-party hacks. That's how I see it. And I think Theresa May should get tough and say, right, you lot, start behaving, or we're going to have a referendum on your abolition. I reckon that might make them come into line. After all, you know, they turn up, they sign on for a daily allowance. Lunch there is great. I've been there several times. It's very subsidised. Traditional, old-fashioned English grub. The claret's not expensive either. I mean, look, it's the best old people's home in London. You know, and that's how many of the peers themselves describe it. They're not going to want to wreck all of that. That's my view. They might just come into line and start behaving. Valentine is calling from Bromley. Good evening, Valentine.
Good evening, Nigel.
So
on
what?
This one,
yep.
I disagree with you, unfortunately.
Well, that's all right. That's absolutely what we're here for on LBC, Valentine. Tell me where I've got it wrong.
Yeah, I think we should categorically not have a referendum on abolishing the House of Lords as we know it. We currently have one House of Parliament immersed in political short-termism.
Yep.
And we need a Chamber of Representatives who are not motivated by political currency. Although I accept that the House of Lords does need some reform, ultimately, in my humble opinion, I think they're healthy for our democracy.
Well, Valentine, we've had the reform. The point is 1999 was the reform. That was where Blair got rid of the hereditary peers, and we were just left with 92 of them. So we've had the reform. What possible reform? I mean, how do you get rid of 500 of Blair and Cameron's mates? You simply can't do it. So Valentine, your concern that what if the House of Lords becomes dominated by political short-termism? My solution of an elected Senate where each individual serves one 15-year term would do away with that problem, wouldn't it?
Yes and no, because 15 years isn't life, and ultimately a life peer never has the issue to worry about being re-elected or losing their seat.
But I would ban them. I would ban them from standing for re-election. I would say it's a one-term job that you do, and you do it actually not for a long-term career. You do it because you want to put something back into the country.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a solution. But, you know, how we ultimately get, you know, some type of situation that suits me and suits you, I'm sure there'll be many ideas. But ultimately, I want to point out that, you know, the Nazis were elected with a strong manifesto, and, you know, that's history's greatest example of the tyranny of the majority.
Yeah, I mean, they were the biggest party, and they declared emergency powers, and Hindenburg was weak. It was a slightly different argument with it. I mean, Valentine, look, what I'm saying is this. That we had a referendum, we had a general election, we've had votes in the House of Commons, and all of that is now being overturned by the Remainers in the House of Lords. Theresa May has to say or do something, surely.
Well, I welcome what the House of Lords are doing ultimately, because, you know, one point I hear severally is, you know, in the last general election, so many percentage of people voted for parties that, you know, wanted to the customs union and so on. However, I voted for Theresa May, and I've never voted Conservative before. I've always traditionally voted Labour.
Yeah.
But I only voted for Theresa May in this case, tactically, to keep Jeremy Corbyn out. And ideally, I would have voted for the Lib Dems, but I don't even think they stood where I live in Bromley.
Oh, I think they would have done.
My choices were severely limited, and I ended up voting tactically. I might as well just have stayed home for the day. So I don't think that the analogy that, you know, 80% of people voted for parties that wanted to leave, and if that was almost our second.
But I mean, that's what the manifestos said. Valentine, I want a sensible upper chamber that is not like you, subject to political short-termism. I'm just saying they've overstepped the mark, broken the Salisbury Convention. I thank you for your call. Shaz on Facebook says there needs to be a scrutiny committee for the Commons, not a dictatorship. Shaz, I don't want a dictatorship. I want an upper house. I want a revising house, but not one that is stuffed full of Blair's mates and Cameron's mates, and too many of them, party apparatchiks who, frankly, have achieved nothing in life and not much in politics. That's how I see it. Tom is a first-time caller from Warwick. Good evening, Tom.
Yeah, hi, Nigel. I agree with you. I believe that we should have a referendum on the House of Lords. I do also think that the issue is a two-sided coin, if you know what I mean. Like, yeah, as you said, there are a lot of old fossils in the House of Lords. You've got the Heseltines, you've got...
Oh, come on. I mean, show the former Deputy Prime Minister some respect, please.
I'm sorry, I'll slap myself on the wrist.
Okay, good.
And we've got Lib Dems in there who are they anymore? But anyway, my main point is that the two-sided coin, like, you've seen what has happened in the US. Now you've got the House of Representatives and the House of the Senate, and I'm sure you know that. And you see, like, there's a deadlock. They'll become deadlocked. Like, not much seems to get done. If there is a chance of Corbyn forming a government in the Commons, and there's something happening in the Tories in this proposed Senate, you are going to get some serious deadlock there. There's going to be no progress. And I also think it's just like they make so many failures. I mean, one failure is that they didn't put you in there, for example. That's just one of them.
Oh, thank goodness for that, Tom. I mean, can you imagine Can you imagine? I mean, I think I'd be almost more unpopular in the House of Lords than I am in the European Parliament.
Well, that's basically the same thing, isn't it? Bureaucratic.
Yeah. Tom, you make a really important point. there was a big proposed reform of the House of Lords back in 1968, and it was funny because Michael Foot and Enoch Powell found themselves on the same side opposing any concept of elections to the House of Lords because they feared it would give it extra power and lead potentially to the kind of deadlock you're talking about that we do see sometimes in the USA. And I am aware of that problem, of course I am, but I think if UK senators were only allowed to serve one term, I think then they'd be more objective and far less party political. But it's not perfect. Listen, what I'm proposing is not perfect. I'm not saying it is. But what exists now, frankly, I think is a disgrace to our modern democratic system. And, I thought that what Michael Howard, Lord Howard of Limp, as he now is, said, when he says that the unelected chamber should not defy the will of the people, but also the will of the elected chamber of parliament, was absolutely on the money.
Yeah, I also think it's Tweeter Philip tweeted in earlier. I think it is also easy to criticise the House of Lords because of Brexit. I mean, yes, if people think they have thwarted the will of the people, but I also think to help gain, I don't want to say momentum in this case.
No, please don't.
I think to gain momentum for this movement, I think that we should focus on more issues where the House of Lords has stepped out of line. Otherwise, we risk sounding. Look.
I have been complaining about the House of Lords now for some years. I've said before on this programme, I think there needs to be a referendum. I'm now suggesting the Prime Minister uses this as a weapon to get them to do their job properly. Tom, Thank you very much indeed for your call. Annette, who describes herself as a staunch Remainer from the delightful village of Chilham, down near Canterbury, says, am I correct to assume that you would turn down a place in the House of Lords if it was offered to you? Yes or no answer, please. I don't know how many times I have to do this, Annette, but the answer is yes. OK? £300 a day, and some of these lords don't even stay for the debate. They just pick up their money and do a runner. Nice one, says Susan. Dean is a first-time caller from Abingdon and my last caller on this subject today. Good evening, Dean.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to talk to you at last. I've been trying for a long, long time.
Have you got us on speed dial, or is it just tough to get through?
Tough to get through.
Right, well, you're through, Dean. The floor is yours.
I'd like to say, Nigel, the last thing we want is another load of politicians being paid 75 grand a year to sit in another chamber, right, and it going to and fro, and deadlock. Because that's what will happen. We know it.
Well, it is a downside risk, Dean. But what would you do then? Just leave this lot where they are?
No, I would not. No, I would not. What I would do is elect a parliament, right, of the Commons, the House of Lords to be abolished completely.
Yep.
Right, no chamber put in place. Right, and a fair proportion of the country, it should be PR, basically.
Yeah.
On the votes to the Commons, on MPs to the Commons.
All right, well, I tell you what, Dean, ever since that great big parliamentary fight back in 1911, endlessly we come back to arguments about the powers of the House of Lords, the composition of the House of Lords, and it isn't going away anytime soon. Dean, I thank you very much for persisting and getting through. Eric on Facebook says, why not advertise jobs in the House of Lords for the ordinary people? That's what Blair said was going to happen with people's peers. And what do we get? A bunch of his mates and a load of Camerons too. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show.